was the exhaust system from RB8. So back in 2012. So this was a project that I worked on. It was actually a really interesting project at the time. And it was one of those things that in making big performance improvements in Formula One is quite rare. But this was one of them where we actually made sort of a giant step overnight. So on RB7, we had the exhausts down in the floor and we used to blow the exhaust down to the diffuser and it gave us a lot of downforce. The FIA for 2012 changed the regulations and said, right, the exhaust tailpipe, which is this part here, must be above a certain height and it must be pointing upwards because they didn't want the exhaust being directed into the floor. So what we did was we put a bodywork out the back of the exhaust. And the idea was you'd get the exhaust flow to stick to the bodywork and then run down into the diffuser. But when the car was launched on track, we weren't getting the performance we were expecting. And what we actually eventually found out was every time a cylinder fires in the engine, you get a pressure pulse that runs up here. So at the exhaust pipe, you basically got all these pulses firing as the exhaust is flowing. And what it was doing was it was picking the exhaust flow up off the bodywork and sort of just sending out here. Right. So it wasn't going where we wanted to. So what we ended up doing was we added this to the exhaust, which is called a resonator. So what happens is the pressure pulses come up the exhaust, they run up this tube, bounce back, and then cancel out the next pressure pulses coming out of the exhaust. So what you actually end up with, rather than this pulsing flow, you end up with a steady state flow. And the sort of more constant, less transient, and it stuck to the bodywork and ran down to the exhaust. It ran down to the diffuser. So we introduced this at Valencia 2012, and it was one of those just moments where I was like, "Wow, we've got a lot of downforce." And Sebastian Vettel put the car on pole by half a second, and then during the race he was pulling out 1 second a lap at the beginning of the race until, unfortunately, the car retired with an alternator failure, which was on the engine, which is a completely separate issue, but. This was one of those moments that then, right, we've unlocked a huge amount of potential here. And then we continued to develop this actually throughout the rest of the season and then on to RB9. But this was like one of those moments where it was like, right, massive performance.
And that was all down to that bit?
That bit added to the exhaust. Yeah.
That's incredible. And do you feel free to feel smug about it. Do you feel smug about it?
I don't feel smug. I feel quite proud because it was a project that is like a lot of people worked on it and there was a huge amount of performance that came out of it. And I think this actual exhaust won Japan with Sebastian Vettel in 2012.
Amazing.